Good day, colleagues. I'm Vadia Bala. I'm a trainee for the doctorate program of population health at Campbell University in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I take this opportunity to present the impact of augmented intelligence in healthcare. And this topic is very passionate to me, and as part of my final presentation with my doctorate training under the supervisor of Professor Chris Dennis, I'll be discussing today about the impact of 3D printing innovation in healthcare. So let's jump right into it and have a discussion. So what will this cover as a roadmap? What I want to talk about is the technology, the know and how additive manufacturing works, and where adoption stands today in healthcare. What are the advantages and disruption thesis, and why it matters in healthcare, and the challenges that we have moving forward. What are the barriers, risks, and ethics that needs to be embedded? So we'll have a good look at it. And what is the innovation landscape moving forward? And we'll discuss about the clinical applications from models to bioprinted tissues. And the four core domains, as I call, is the value-based care, equity, regulation framework, and operational integrity, and further evaluation of all those within the context of healthcare. So what is medical 3D printing? Additive manufacturing builds a physical object layer by layer directly from a digital 3D model, which is the inverse of a traditional subtractive manufacturing that cuts away from a block. So in healthcare, the model usually comes straight from a patient's own CT, MRI, and 3D scans, making every output patient-centered and specific by default. So there is customization that's built up as a standard. So the common medical print methods, for example, we have the extrusion method, we have photo polymerization method, which gives a high detail, for example, in anatomical context and dental. And then you have metal, titanium load-bearing implants, for example, for joint replacements, hips and knee replacements. And bioprinting, for example, living cells in bio ink for tissue implantation. So a scan will lead to a design, and then to a printing, and then to implementation. So let's have a brief discussion about what are we today and where are we and where it's headed. With regards to the global market with 3D printing in healthcare, as of it stands, is 47% of the US population now run an in-house 3D printing lab. So some of the data shows that there is a 3.2 million plus patient-specific implant units are in place in 2025, and there is a 60% of new medical devices they use 3D printing in design, and the hospital integrated practice is running around 1,200 plus. So we are looking at an increasing trend right from 2025. If you look at the growth of in a decade from 4 to 19 by 2035, which in a 10 years time span is quite significant. So let's briefly outline the 5 clinical fronts in which the augmented intelligence with 3D printing is quite prevalent. One is anatomical models, 2 is surgical guides, 3 is prosthetics and implants, 4 is bioprinting and tissue, and the 5th one is drug printing. So with the anatomical models, we know that life-sized replica of patient's anatomy for surgical mannequin and rehearsal are in use. The surgical guides, for example, patient-matched cutting and drilling templates are used in healthcare practice. And prosthetics and implants, both in dental as well as in pre-amputation surgery for the limbs, is quite prevalent. Then we have bioprinting of the tissues for living cells, using the bio ink to build a skin replica or a cartilage replica or blood vessels, and hoping one day that we could actually bioprint an organ. And drug printing, which are specifically tailored to medications production, and this is going to only increase in the future with regards to the advanced technology with 3D printing. Here, as a deep dive, I'll discuss briefly about the efficiency with regards to the time and healthcare delivery. So the most adopted clinical use today, which is a printed replica of the patient's anatomy, lets the surgeon plan and rehearse before the first incision. The patient matched guide then carries that plan precisely into the surgery, shortening operating time and reducing the intraoperative complications and improving overall patient outcomes. And looking at some literature, I have seen that there is an average time reduction of about an hour per case using the anatomical models. And there has been some decline in the operating room cost due to the time that's required to operate per case by about $3,720 US. And there is an efficiency within the time management that's saved per case by about 23 minutes. Why this has already shifting the model of care, because we are seeing efficient use of time, value-based care, and there is an economical advantage in using this. And this also embeds itself into teaching and minimizes the surgical related harm to improve patient outcome. One example I would like to discuss is the prosthetics and implants, how the 3D printing has pretty much inverted the production and increased the efficiency in the use, especially with regards to the cost of a custom prosthetics. the conventional prosthesis, on an average, can blow up to $1,000 plus. However, with 3D printed devices, the cost could be minimized as low as $50, because conventional prosthetics and implants are mass produced in fixed sizes and they're not patient specific. However, the 3D printing has pretty much inverted it by patient specific manufacturing that's inbuilt within the patient's geometry. So the results are better fit, and the implant survival is also longer with minimal complications. So this has resulted in off-the-shelf and radical collapse of the low-end prosthesis overall. I mean, this is not just for one particular population, so we are looking at more for a pediatric to middle-aged to geriatric services. So here I will briefly discuss about the promise versus the reality of the bioprinting. Because the bioprinting deposits the living cells in a bio-ink to build functional tissue, right? So this targets a single largest structural failure in transplant medicine. So you can see in the slide from early 2000, where the bioprinted bladder were implanted in spina bifida patients. And then in 2022, we had the world first 3D bioprinted ear from patients' own cartilage cells. And then in 2024, patient received a 3D printed windpipe, which is the trachea transplantation. And in 2025, the FDA clinical trials of bioresorptible tracheal splints, vascular network and breakthroughs. Fantastic. A great outcome with regards to the technology. However, we are still years away for a solid vascularized organs, probably 20 years plus. So what works today is something which is very flat, hollow tissue, for example, skin, cartilage, bladder, airway, drug testing, mini organs, etc. is probably in evolution, but it is possible. But major organs, years away, and that's the reality. So let's quickly dive into the pharmaceutical aspects of 3D printing and how it has revolutionized the pharmaceutical industry. So 3D printing has got the advantage of production of a pill with a precise dosing, the shape of the drug, and the pharmacodynamics and the pharmacokinetics of the release of the medication tailored to an individual, especially cancer-related drugs. And there is an advantage of polypills, for example, one or two medications used for specific conditions, for example, blood pressure or epilepsy, can be combined together to have a precise action. And it can be controlled with the pharmacokinetics and the dynamics with the dose release. So tuned release with the print geometry controls and dissolution methods and on-demand supply. So these are all quite revolutionary aspects of 3D printing when it comes to the pharmaceutical industry. So we've discussed about these aspects of 3D printing and innovation in healthcare, but why does it matter? So the 5 levers are personalization, which is every output is patient specific by default. For example, fit, function, and dosing matched for one particular body and mental health. The second is the cost at the lower end. Collapses the price of simple devices, for example, off-the-shelf prosthetics, and avoids the cost and the time. The second is the speed and the iteration with which a design can take place. and equity, where this is aimed to be available for everyone, every time, at reasonable cost. So we kind of aim for a distributed manufacturing where the production migrates from a factory designed to a point of care towards the patient, to have a patient-specific, shorter, and resilient supply in the supply chain. So let's briefly compare and contrast the core evaluation of 3D printing in care delivery model. So if you do not have the 3D printing, so the today's model is mass produced, one size fits all, which then leads to a patient specific by default 3D printing enabled model. The second is a centralized distant factories can be changed to a distributed point of care printing. Number 3 is patient fitted to a device, but in this case with the 3D printing the device is built to the patient, and then the ordering, shipping, waiting, which is the supply chain issues and customization, has been changed to design, print on demand with time efficiency, and organ supply capped by donors versus the tissue manufactured from your own cells. So the verdict is sustaining an innovation today, disruptive tomorrow. It already involves existing workflows, and its deeper threat is relocating manufacturing from distance to a point of care. Now, we have this great technology, but then how do we evaluate the success of it? So the analysis is examined through 4 domains, from the innovation and technology, evidence-based articles, and 1 domain is value-based care and reimbursement. The second domain is health equity and access. The third domain is regulation, policy, and patient safety, and operational supply. So essentially, if we have a specific key performance indicators on all these domains, we should be able to measure the success of the 3D printing and innovation in healthcare. So let's talk about the economics of it. What's the value, what's the cost, and what has to be paid. So we know that looking through the economical lens, the value-based care rewards outcome per dollar, not the volume. So 3D printing can raise the value, but its business case still runs ahead of the payment system. So how can the cost be avoided? So the 3D printing pretty much eliminates the low-end prosthetics and off-the-shelf artificial implants. Therefore, it's more patient-specific. So we see better outcomes because of the decreased downstream cost with better implant fit and reduced complications. And of course, we need to monitor the reimbursement gap because of the variable funding system in different countries. That needs to be further evaluated and studied. But an overarching view is that the 3D printing is aimed to provide value-based care with better investment on returns and economical value for patient care. So we looked at the economical side of it, but let's look at the equity side of it. So wearing an equity lens, who's benefiting it, how far we can reach the service. So 3D printing is a double-edged, where it's dramatically cheaper devices can widen the access, but the capital, software, and expertise can pretty much retract the service within the major centers. So one particular scenario is democratizing the low-cost devices. For example, a $50 prosthesis and a local printing extend care to underserved and developing world patients. The second is a pediatric lifeline. For example, a cheap reprinting fits children who outgrow devices. Here, the affordability that fixed devices can't match. Then the risk of high-tech divide. So essentially we have barriers like software licenses, user guides licenses, skill sets that's involved. So there is a significant gap. Whether this can facilitate access and equity across the board, only time will tell. One aspect is the conflict of interest. Now, when the hospital becomes the manufacturer, the line between provider and patient care versus device manufacturer blurs. Now here the accountability for safety has to be very strictly monitored. So can oversight keep pace with the bedside? Not sure. FDA is engaged but still evolving, and further clinical governance is required and needs to be set up across the board. The point of care question. So who is the manufacturer and who is the caregiver? Who is responsible for quality assurance? Is it the hospital or the hospital/manufacturer? And then who is going to validate and who's going to be consistently delivering this? So these are a significant issue, which is more so coming under the governance structures to set up appropriate policies and procedures in place for this 3D printing to be embedded within the system in the medium to long term. One aspect with the 3D printing is the distributed production and system resilience. We have clearly seen the resilience during the COVID time, where the hospital printed the face shields and the ventilator parts when the supply chain got disrupted. So 3D printing converts a long centralized supply chain into a local on-demand production, trading the inventory and shipping for in-house capability. So it actually facilitates a model of care where it is quite integrated within the healthcare system for innovation, technology, delivery, and surveillance. Now in this slide, we are looking at more a balanced overview of what are the barriers we have right in place, what are the risks involved, and what are the ethical questions that we should be asking ourselves. The first thing is the cost and the capital. So high-end prosthesis, the material cost, the software licenses, and the hospital management. The second is the reimbursement gaps, which is again, we are talking within the United States perspective, but across the globe, the reimbursements are quite variable. So who is paying for what? What is the return on investments? Then what is the regulation at the moment, and what is the uncertainty about the regulations we have with regards to the different parts and models? Then we have significant workforce issues, training, digital inclusion, and appropriate skill sets across the board so that the equity can be reached to the rural and the remote community. what do we have with regards to the quality assurance framework? Do we have appropriate key performance indicators to monitor it? How do we validate? How do we assess them? How do we monitor them? And what are the ethical principles in place? So essentially, we need to have an appropriate policies, procedures, and clinical governance set up within the legislation of using the 3D printing model. So the overall verdict, in my opinion, is a realistic roadmap, and it is a disruptor. But if we sort of implement in a staged and a graded fashion, I see a significant game changer in bioadaptive ethical model of care, is what I call. By scaling the models of care, setting up the guides, and set up a clinical governance within the next 3 years, and then reaching the wider community with improving the equity and the access, training, and upgrading the skill sets over the next 3 to 10 years. And then over a 20-year period is developing a bioprinting model for vascularized organs and solid organs with organ transplant. So essentially, this is going to be a game changer if we have appropriate systems in place. So what is the key take-home message, the 5 things in summary that we need to remember? It's already there. It's already there in some of the hospitals as a mainstream, as we have seen that 47% of the US hospitals print in-house of these models. Customization is the default, where it's originating from the patient for the care of the patient. So it is very patient-centered approach. Deep shift in location, where the manufacturing migrates from the factory to the bedside. And this is a significant supply chain revolution. 4, bioprinting is a high ceiling bet. Targets the organ shortages, and it is a transformative medicine over the next 20 years. And it's a game changer. And for a system which is the bottleneck, the innovative healthcare with 3D printing is going to be a significant disruptor. However, if staged properly over the coming years, we are going to see a significant revolution in healthcare. So dear folks, thank you for listening to me, and here are my references that I used to have the discussion. Obviously is well beyond my expertise to talk about the innovation and technology of 3D printing. So I'm barely scraping the surface, learning about it. But I can say that over the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see a significant milestone healthcare delivery model using augmented intelligence and 3D printing in healthcare.